Hi, so welcome again to Unity is Strength and our video called Discussions. So as you know, Mohamad's back, and this time we have on a new guest, Ignat. And so Ignat is just moved to Israel. So we're going to actually have a discussion between a Palestinian and an Israeli today, and we'll see how that goes. And so I'd like to thank you for coming on. And so for those of you who missed Mohamad's first video or wants to get to know him a little better, we can start with having Mohamad give a little bit of an introduction to himself.
Oh, hi. Well, simply put, my family is from Palestinian origins, from Haifa specifically. I was born refugee in Lebanon and technically still am until I came to the States, of course, and that's part of my interest, how to spend all your life as a refugee, how does it affect your life, and the understanding of the issue. During that, I still managed to, launch some businesses, been successful at some time, allowed me to travel the world, meet some people, understand more, and still hoping to make other people understand more or less, or share our point of view, and hopefully make an impact even on few people.
Yep. Very cool. Very cool. So the video about the businesses was what he talked about earlier. So you could watch that again if you want to learn more. But now we get to meet Ignat. So Ignat is Unity is Strength Core Forum's newest moderator. And congratulations. Mohamad's been a moderator for some time now. So now you can talk about yourself and coming from the United States as well, what was your first impression of Israel?
Okay, well, that's a hefty question. So, I mean, to make it brief, I'm actually originally from Ukraine. And the part of Ukraine, if you look at Ukraine, the map, half of Ukraine is actually Russian, speaking Russian Orthodox, and the other half is Ukrainian speaking and Catholic. So I come from the Russian Orthodox side of Ukraine. And I grew up mostly there in Moscow, and then I moved to New York. And then from New York, I went to California to study. I got married, and I got a Ph.D. in history from Stanford in Jewish history, Russian history. I started to work as a lecturer in Jewish studies at San Jose State University, and I'd done some work there administratively. I was a coordinator of Jewish studies, and eventually I quit for a number of reasons, and then I decided to come to Israel with my family, and the main reason really is to have my children grow up in a Hebrew society, in a Hebrew culture. That's where I am now, basically. So actually, I live in a city called Beit Shemesh, and it's close to Jerusalem. There's the older part of Beit Shemesh, which is somewhat kind of mixed secular religious, and there's some Arab Israelis or Palestinian Israelis there. I live in the part of Beit Shemesh that is actually next to an ultra-Orthodox community that you pass by on the way to where I live, and it's more Orthodox, basically. That's basically the background.
Okay, very cool. So Mohamad, do you have any thoughts about limitations in your ability to travel and move to Israel?
Well, thoughts, no, frustrations more, no, more than thoughts. Well, technically, yes, it's the whole issue is like one of the biggest question starters in our life. Like First, you are born as a Palestinian, so you're not, unlike any other country where you are born, usually you get a citizenship, but that's not the case because briefly, I don't want to go too much into that, but briefly, no country hosting Palestinian refugees want to actually solve it. They actually like to have refugees because it's a trading card. It's a good trading card financially and elsewise. So you ask yourself, okay, so I am born into a country I can't get citizenship for. What about going back to whatever it is? Let's say the Palestinian side. I'm not, by definition, the Israeli side is the occupied side. So and the argument is about the right of return. Fine. What about the Palestinian side? It's also not allowed, and that's another. So technically, you're even a refugee, and you're not a not a citizen of your own pretext citizenships, which make I don't know how to say it, an ununderstandable loop or logic breakdown. It doesn't make sense. The simplest way for someone to understand is there's an enemy, you have to fight it, and you get stuck in that loop. And things can be, in that sense, simple logically. It will complicate your life more. But if you want to really ask questions, you get here. You start understanding a lot of details that's happening and how the whole thing is not what it looks like. And of course, you wonder why are millions of people under that influence, and how come the few of you aren't? And then you get where we are. We can solve, technically we can't solve the whole issue right now, but we can, at least, as I said in the introduction, try or hope some people understand, and maybe we understand afterwards.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So as a Palestinian refugee, right? You grew up in a refugee camp?
Yeah, at first, then outside. But still, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, your status in Lebanon was questionable at best, right? Because as a Palestinian refugee, right?
My what? My status?
Your civil status in Lebanon.
Yeah. Oh, definitely not questionable to them. It was literally, how do I say this? Literally, you're out of place. As a Palestinian refugee, you cannot really work. You cannot really, I'm saying legally. Of course, everyone works under the table. It's like you're a legal immigrant somewhere else. But technically, you can't work. You can't buy a state. You can't have a job in your name. You can't travel. You can't have those things easily, unless, as I said in my previous video, and that changes everything. If you get some money will like override that status in doing business, because there's loopholes you can use, you can pay off. And same thing in travel. When you show like as a refugee, you're and having a travel document, you're exactly the contrary to everything documented in the embassy's requirements. The embassy requirement, when you apply for a visa, requires that you have the intention to go back. Being a refugee by itself means you don't have an intention to go back. What? Being a refugee with some money that will, give them some relief, and then you get some visas, etc., or unless you get a work visa somewhere, and that's different. But the limitations, of course, it exists massively. And this is why most people, when they are blocked everywhere, they have the one and only solution, or the always available solution, like get paid and join a militia. You'll at least get a fixed salary every month.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyways, yeah. So now that we've covered that topic, next topic is about free speech. You've all lived in a number of different countries, and you've both lived in both the West and in Middle East region. And so what are your thoughts about different types of free speech restrictions and liberties within each region and between the regions?
Okay, do you want to start, Ignat?
You can start. No, maybe jump in. We'll see.
Okay.
Well, mine is a little complicated. Since 2011 up to now, actually excluding the last 2 years within COVID era, I actually traveled to maybe 44 cities so far.
Wow.
Including most of Europe and few US states, and prior to that, few African countries, etc., etc. One of the things you notice that everywhere we have issues with freedom of speech, and some of the issues is resident from prior eras. For example, you mentioned you lived in Ukraine, so you know that. I went many times to Eastern Europe, and with some people, especially the middle-aged upwards, you will see that even communist discussions or stuff like that are still sensitive. Or literally, I saw someone look around when they say it's the intelligence system they were fearing and how it used to be. Of course, that was no stranger to me, because we lived through that in specifically in Lebanon and Syria with the Syrian intelligence, which is for many, it's an extension for the communist system. Now, of course, it's changed. The freedom of speech in some part is still moderate. And I'm going to say in the Middle East, it's still almost non-existent until the recent few years. We have some breakthroughs. In the West, it's going back to a block. It's going back to a bad block. It's people are very free to express so much they created new blocks for themselves under the sensitivity and under the politically correct issues. Like right now, I find myself, how do I say? It's easier for me to focus on the Palestinian or Arab issues and criticizing that, and people will be more accepting because I am one. And this is under the politically correct propaganda. While if I go criticize Israelis or Jewish directly, oh, now I'm anti-Semitic. If I go criticize the blacks, I'm I'm racist, or the Asians or whatever. Well, technically, and I have to mention this since we talked about it. Technically, if I want to abuse the politically correct thing, we're in Asia. So I'm technically Asian. I am Palestinian, so I'm technically son of Sam, so I can criticize. My identity is Palestinian, so I can talk about Palestinian. And I speak Arabic, so I'm an Arab. I'm a Muslim, so I can speak about the Muslims. I believe in Judaism, so I can speak about the Jewish. Technically, if you want to abuse it, you can, but this is the roadblock the West is having now. Too sensitive. Now everything must be explained and colored, and then you really don't get to have the meaningful discussion you have. However, that doesn't mean it's worse. It's way better. You still get to say what you want, even if some people label you with hey, you're ignorant or racist or whatever. That's much better than what actually happens in the Middle East. If you're within a regime and that doesn't include you or accept you, you're definitely going to jail. If it's not jail, it's like if you're a celebrity or protected and they can't really drag you to jail and have you disappear, then at least they will bombard you with legal lawsuits and stuff, pretending they are going the legal way. Because in the Middle East, and this is where it gets interesting, they pretend they have freedom of speech. Like the West, actually worse than the West, but similarly, they use the sensitivity thing. In this case, in the Arab case, they use it under the protected, I don't know what to call them. They aren't minority, protected categories. I'm gonna say categories, although I don't like any of them. But what are protected categories? Politicians, they have immunity for prosecution. Men of cloth, so whatever religion you are, whether Muslim, Jewish, Christian, as long as you preach, you are also under a protection. So you can't sue them or speak ill of them. Presidents, ministers, judges, high officials. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about everyone in a seat of power, everyone in a seat of responsibility. If those people are actually protected, so who do we criticize? Our neighbors? Fine. we only can do that.
Mm-hmm.
Does it answer your question?
Yeah.
Rebecca?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, like basically, yeah. So what do you think about free speech?
Well, I mean, you mean in Israel? In Israel, in America, in the West?
Yeah, Israel versus the West and any other country in either region that you would know about.
Well, I think, well, even, within the West, let's say in America, in Israel as well, but it depends which groups you're in, because sometimes there's a certain amount of social pressure that's exerted on a person within certain groups, right? So you have certain newspapers that certain people read, and they only want to read those newspapers because they gravitate towards the material that the newspapers present. You have, similarly, in the U.S., but you have in Israel, you have, for example, in Haaretz newspaper, which is not read by people who are, say, right-wing, and the same thing with left-wing people don't read right-wing newspapers, and they all share information, but skewed in a particular glance, right? In a particular way. I think that commonality between Israel and America is quite strong. Where the problem, I think, lies, I mean, I can't comment on the general Middle East outside of Israel, but the problem really lies is the echo chamber that people sometimes make from the material that they consume, and it's easier to kind of just filter out contradictory information in order to kind of mentally zoom in on one opinion or one side. And that I think creates certain problems for freedom of speech, because people don't want to hear other people's opinions. And it's not just in terms of kind of boycotting the other person, right? In terms of not recognizing the other person, but in terms of simply wanting to hear what kind of the same minded people say to you without real dialogue, without needing of any dialogue. I mean, that's I think in terms of how freedom of speech could be contravened in interpersonal relationships. I mean, outside of state policies. Does that answer your question? I mean,
Yeah, that answers. So what do you think of what the other one said? What are your thoughts?
Of what Mohamad said?
Of what Mohamad said, and Mohamad, what do you think of what Ignat said?
No comments on that. I actually want to add something, an idea I remembered right now, that how freedom of speech, which is praised and publicly celebrated by the politicians or representatives of a certain country, especially in our countries, usually is used mostly by them and only them. So they say, hey, there's a freedom of speech, and they use it. But how do they use it? They use it to spread their own interpretation of politics or religious teachings, and they have to make everyone listen. And as I mentioned earlier, that many people, just like religious people don't follow the book, follow the person reciting the book.
Mhm.
Or in this case, the politician reciting the agenda of the politics, which is not the case. Most of the politicians usually have a text about their idealism and program they want to do, but they actually promote different things. Same as in religious preachers.
Yeah.
So freedom of speech is basically, if I want to brief it, it's overrated. It's technically, it's not really existent in its true form, because it's either too liberal and you're stuck in borders of sensitivity, or too strict and you can't say anything they don't like.
Yeah.
Do you agree?
I mean, is that in terms of what situation? In terms of in general, in terms of how people interact?
I'm
Or-
talking in general about how it's promoted in the countries. Like either the
I
country
understand.
is too liberal, like, hey, we have freedom of speech, we can't speak, but still the journalists, publicists, and everyone
Right.
is stuck under a border of sensitivity. So I'm free to say whatever I want, but as I mentioned before, I can't really attack Jewish because it might be labeled anti-Semitism, even if my criticism has roots. And
No, yeah, of course.
otherwise,
Yes.
you're stuck in another country where you can't
Yeah.
criticize in the first place.
No, that's a problem, of course. Yeah. So again, it has to probably come back to this, kind of within mentality, right? Group mentality.
There's
That if you're coming in from, let's say, outside the group, right? So even if the person inside the group will say the same thing, but since you're an outsider,
exactly.
you are more foreign, more kind of inimical to the group than the person in the group.
This is exactly what I
thing.
tried to say when I said oversensitive.
Okay,
So you
I
have to
understand.
be what they call in the States politically correct. Politically correct, when I asked, how can you be politically correct? They said you have to be, as you said, within the group. So I have to be a Jewish to say something about the Jews. For example, because of my travels, I have different and thick accents because I tried to learn many languages. So when I'm in Eastern Europe, I tried to learn Russian or French in the West, or Danish or English or Arabic or Hebrew. So I have thick accents, and sometimes even when I'm speaking Arabic, you can't place me as Palestinian. So if I'm criticizing Palestinians and you don't know I'm Palestinian, yeah, I get weird reactions. Then I have to clarify, I am Palestinian. Then I can go on. As you said, I am within the group now. I can be part of it. So the accent, sorry, not the accent, but the situation, if someone understands who you are, they treat you differently. Like those, for example, like those, if you follow, I follow some stuff on the internet, and there's funny situations I see. For example, a white-looking person criticizing the blacks. He's technically someone from black race, and so everyone will call him racist until he clarifies, hey, I'm black. I just happen to be from, let's say, a white mother or a white father, so his color isn't really black. So now he can criticize. But why? If you're talking about anti-racism, then you're just contradicting yourself, because if you're anti-racist, why do you care what race the person is before he speaks?
So, okay, so good. So can I break the border now? Because since, as an
Of
Israeli,
course.
you as a Palestinian refugee. So
This is what I do.
I want to crack the ice. So we have this initiation just right now. We're going to actually dive into the discussion that we actually are going to have discussion about. Okay, so let's crack the ice. So I just now immigrated to Israel. Okay, you as a Palestinian refugee cannot.
Yeah.
You have international law stating that there should be some kind of agreement, well-negotiated agreement, and it must be done immediately to relieve the stress of the refugee status, right?
Yes.
To solve the problem of the refugee crisis. Okay, and this has been the international law since 48.
I
December of
believe
48.
solving the refugee thing will be the most direct way to creating peace.
So exactly. So solving the refugee problem will be the most direct way to make peace.
Yeah.
To make peace.
If you
between
want, I can jump
Israelis.
forward. I can jump forward and answer questions that are very sensitive, specifically
Please.
about right of
That's
return.
why we're
and stuff
here.
like that.
We're here for that.
Yeah. Okay. How do I imagine solving that? First, I base everything, in my opinion. I'll be fair. I'll use bad things and good things as they are in the world. So I don't want to solve the Palestinian issue with giving them or us extra things than even the natives don't have. No. All I'm saying is, how come a Palestinian refugee, I'm talking about not the first, not second generation, I'm talking about the third generation, was born outside. Now, luckily, my daughters are born in the States. They are American, so that's solved. So many of us are already solved that problem. But for the many left who have their people, our children or our upcoming generation born in, let's say, an Arab country, they still don't have a nationality. How does it make sense? That's the very first problem we have. The Arab says this is because we are defending the Palestinian cause. So how do you defend the Palestinian cause by banning or putting aside, specifying this category, creating a specific banned category for people who are born on your land. However, and this is one part of the hypocrite acts, if the same Arab goes to any other country, they say, hey, I want to give birth to my children and they should have nationality. This is why most Arabs go give birth in France or Britain or USA or elsewhere. So what they demand for themselves, they don't give. That's one problem. According to my own understanding or my own belief, I don't think the second or third generation should be awarded right of return. And if it should be awarded, it should be relative to the state that accepting them or not. For example, my parents are from Haifa, which is Israel right now. So should Israel give me right of return? No, I don't believe that. Why? And let me be very clear here, using if and else. I'll suppose 100% my family were right. And I believe that. Like, they shouldn't have left the land, one, or they shouldn't have been pushed out. Either way, it's their right. According to my own, I'm using my own beliefs, my own religious beliefs. I cannot execute the punishment of what some Israeli did, in my belief, against my family. I cannot execute it against his grandchildren, because his grandchildren are like me, just born into this world. They didn't do the act of violence themselves. Now, someone would say they didn't do an act of violence. Fine, I'm not going to go into that argument. It's not up to me. In my beliefs, those people are dead. So their judgment is upon to God, the same God I believe in. I cannot execute judgment on dead people. I cannot even argue them. I cannot even question them. That's done. That's up to God right now. What I want to judge is current situation right now. Right now, I'm born in a country. I must have citizenship. And what's worse, before I demand Israel to give me a passport or right of return, my own people don't. So what are we talking about? My enemy isn't one person. It's a whole institution. My enemy is a whole regime. A regime is built around abusing our case, abusing our situation, like, hey, we're refugees. Many people, when they talk about the refugee situation, they never mention that we as refugees, first, the camps we're in, the camps we're supposedly occupying, they describe us exactly as they describe Israel occupying Palestine. They describe Palestinians occupying the land. However, which is ironic, first, the camps are paid by United Nations as a rent. Of course, the lease is coming up. It was supposedly for 100 years and it's gonna end. But technically, I'm playing on the technicality here. They paid for it, so it's a leased land. It's not occupied land. Two, those very same countries who, and I can at least testify for the Lebanese situation, they want us to remain there and they exaggerate the numbers. Why? Because all over the years up till Trump revoked that decision, every country hosting refugee was getting paid for it. You know that, right?
Yeah.
And those payments weren't going actually to the Palestinians. They were going to the governments hosting the refugees to get paid more. Just like they say right now, Lebanon hosts 2 million Syrians, which in my opinion, unimaginable. It cannot be a real number. 2 million Syrians in Lebanon, that's half the population. That means technically every two people talking, they have a Syrian in between. The land cannot contain 2 million people. I know there's a lot, maybe 500,000 Syrian. I mean, Turkey, the totality of Turkey maybe hosted 2 million Syrians. The whole Syrians are 16 million. So if you say 2 million in Lebanon, 2 million in Turkey, 2 million in Germany, what's left? Why do they say 2 million instead of 500,000? Because, as you know, they get paid in dollars for every number hosted on their land. This is why they cannot really give nationality. Another reason for nationality isn't about the right of return. Everyone says, hey, we're against neutralizing Palestinians. But I can give you an example. You know, Palestinians aren't all Muslims. You know, there's Christians, Jews, and some minorities, and even some Shias. According to the stats, 50 or 60 years ago, there was like 5% Shia, like 10% Christians. Of course, the numbers are different now. When they talk about the right of return, I can remind them in history, during different eras, the Shias were neutralized. They were giving nationality. Why? Because they were a minority and they needed them in that demographic for the voting afterwards, since it's already a segregated and religious system. The Christians, many of them were also given nationality. The Sunnis, never. Why? Because it opens the door for over 300,000 Palestinians, which plays a huge demographic change in the Lebanese system or in the Syrian system. Why? Simply because, again, those systems are built on specific religious sectors. Like, they can't play with the system. They can't add 300 Sunni voters, but they can add 10,000 Christians. Another note that can be taken into account, like the numbers are exaggerated. For example, me and my family, this is an example. We have maybe 2 people or 3 left in Lebanon and under the Lebanese paperwork system. However, if you count, you will find all of us there. They didn't eliminate the people who left. So now if you ask, and most journalists and others say on the public TVs, hey, we have 700,000 Palestinians in Lebanon. It's not true. According to the latest one I was involved in, we're talking of 15 years ago, I know, but still the numbers doesn't add up that fast. More than half were already immigrated. So when we did the statistics, we were talking about 600,000 Palestinians, while in reality there were 270,000 in Lebanon. The rest are just numbers to trade, to spice up the negotiations.
There has been, there probably is still the problem of the Palestinian refugees being used as a pawn political pawn.
This is exactly what I'm saying.
But you know, they do exist. You know,
Oh,
and it's not just the Palestinian refugees,
yeah.
but
Sorry, I
the
had
fate,
to deviate.
the
I
fate
had to
with the
deviate a little.
yes,
I had to deviate from the original question to explain the intensity of the Palestinian refugee issue. Now, since I described it, back to the question, how do I see the sensitive issues about the right of return and stuff? So what I'm supposing or suggesting or hoping that the solution come in the form of allowing mass immigration. This will not solve everything, but it will give some people a chance. Like, hey, you want to still argue about Palestine or Israel or whatever, do that. I mean, we're all arguing after all. Even if there's peace, there's still gonna be problems. Peace wouldn't solve everything. All I'm saying is, until then, until we start actually arguing about real problems, why should we let people die? Why should we let people be miserable? Because and I doubt intelligence agencies or counter-terrorist units don't know this, but leaving those miserable people is literally generating fuel for the militias. And I mentioned before, like, if you have nothing to do, no job to do, and someone comes in and says, hey, you get $400 or $500 to carry a gun, so what? You die or you choose the gun? You choose it. You'll choose it every day to feed your family, unless or until you find another solution. This is not an excuse. This is an explanation. To solve something, you have to understand it. Why are people carrying guns? You think someone is born and like, hey, I want to fight, I want to die for something I don't understand? Of course not. But they give him the understanding they want, especially because most of us have no other solution. As I said, just because I was lucky at some point to break out of the system, and many did, that's because we're human. Not everyone will be chained, but eventually many people will be under that influence. Back to the story again. So solving the immigrant issues, according to the realistic estimation, it's less than 1.5 million around the Arab countries that has no rights. I'm not talking about where they have rights and they can work. If you can work, if you're even given a chance to do so and make a living, then you don't have an excuse to carry arms. And you can see it proven. Like, you don't see militias in United Arab Emirates. You don't see the militias right now in Kuwait. You don't see the militias in, I'm talking about Palestinian ones. That's an example. But you will see Palestinian militia in Syria, in Lebanon, in Iraq, in wherever there's a war zone, because they have nothing to do, no rights. They have the alternative. My suggestion is they should be given the opportunity to leave. And if someone says they can't host them, I wonder, in the Syrian war since 2011, they started accepting millions after millions just to spite Bashar al-Assad. But you can't accept 1 million to solve a major problem that's been happening for 10 decades, so almost, or 9 decades. On the other hand, you ask me about what should be done about the right of return, which is arguable for Palestinians to the current Israeli states. I say, up to the generation that been living this situation, should have some sort of reparations. I don't agree that even myself, if you say, come to Israel under the right of return, I say, right of return to what? I wasn't born there. I don't understand what's there. So you can't just pick me up from here and throw me there. It's actually a bad thing to do for me, to put me back in Haifa, for example, without a job, without roots, right? But as I said, and this is not continuous, up to the people who are actually suffering from the displacement, those people should have some sort of reparations. And this reparation isn't financially costly. It's less than 1 year's of budget in artillery or arms or weapons. So I'm not talking about unrealistic things. I'm talking about, we're talking about 1 million families that cost less than 1 year or 2 years of budgets in arms to solve a major issue. Now, what's left? What's left is you still have a problem. You still have Palestinian areas and Israeli areas that not really defined under the big struggle, but you just pulled out the main negotiation card from everyone, the refugees. Because as I said, so far we never been actually treated as humans. We only been treated as a trading card, and this shouldn't be the case. You want to negotiate, you want to fight. You are born to be a terrorist, or you are born to be whatever you want, and you want to solve your problems by killing people. Why do it in my name? Do it in your own name. That's all I'm saying. Now, do we still have a problem? Yes, we still have a problem. We can solve it. But when you take out that big negotiation card, your chances are way better to do a two-state solution. And why did I say two-state solution? Because right now, one-state solution is not possible. To expand a little on that, people are hung on the words of Palestine and Israel. Funnily or ironically, no one really thinks about it. Israel as a word, which right now is insulting to call a Palestinian who's fanatic about the situation, is actually something in our religion. We know that there was Israel. We know that Abraham or David actually unified it. We know it exists as a word. We know it exists as a religious word as well, as a religious country, as a religious nation. We know it's existent. But right now, during the past years, since it was connected heavily with the words of an enemy, so Israel as an enemy, we eliminated the fact or the remembrance that Israel was a good word to us. In a similar situation, I talked to you earlier about not associating the word Palestine with terrorist. Why? Because word association play a huge role in psychology. Why should you associate that? Then you will always think, well, hey, I'm talking to a Palestinian, oh, terrorist. No, it shouldn't be that way. We are hung on Palestinian word as an identity. But if we also think about it, it's a word that given by another occupation, the Greek occupation at some point. So who chooses for us? Who chooses which occupation is beautifying? Who chooses, like when the other neighboring Arab, let's skip Palestine for a minute, who chooses calling it Lebanon or Syria or Palestine or Jordan? Some people argue, hey, it was never a sovereign country. It wasn't, of course it wasn't, but neither was any of the neighboring countries. There wasn't something called a country. There used to be states under another ruling. So how do we choose which point of history we want? Why are we offended if we say, I want to go back 200 years and call myself an Ottoman, right? Why not go 5,000 years and call myself Kanani or Kildani or Ashuri or or Aramic? You know how many nations came into that area? So people who are hung like about which identity we are, I could remind them that we are only Arabs since 1500 years. So choosing that point is on history just because we speak Arabs. I'm not saying we're not Arabs. We're definitely Arabs. We speak Arabic, we're Arabs. That's a logical identity thing. I'm saying if we want to choose back about Palestine, Palestine is not an Arabic name, nor is Israel. Like in Arabic, it's Israel. I know it's similar, but I'm saying in the conceptual naming, we're choosing a name in the history just because it's associated with the bad thing. It's not a choice, but technically it's just a name. People shouldn't be afraid of naming Israel or Palestine. That's the whole dilemma will will play a huge factor in naming the country, because even if they agreed on one state, they will argue about the name. I think two-state solution would be the more logical or feasible solution.
But that, you know, that solution, if it's possible to effectuate, I mean, at this point, you have so many settlements that are kind of eating away at the West Bank.
If you have rules and regulations, it shouldn't matter where you live.
Right.
If you're living in a country, so Israeli living in a state called Palestine shouldn't be angry about it, because I mean, he lives everywhere. If he's given his right and protection, just like any other citizen, then it's his choice to live there or move to Israel. And similarly for the Palestinian living in Israel, he's Israeli under the law. If he doesn't like it, he can move, given that you give him the choice to move. I mean, you can't put someone and say, you can't move, you can't do anything, and then you say you're liberal. You're not. You give him the choice, and if he doesn't move and doesn't abide by the rules, that's another story. But you can't take away the choice and say, hey, this is forced solution. If it's forced, it's not a solution. You create the two countries and you give people the choice. Even if you're Israeli, you have Arab friends, and you're comfortable with them and you want to live in their area, go live there. You have to give them the choice. Vice versa, if you're Palestinian and you and your family, friends, work, job is, let's say, in Tel Aviv, you can't say, hey, you have a country now, you can't live. You still have to make rules for that. Of course, I understand both will be sensitive about the election and the demographic. I'm not talking about the election rights. I'm talking about the civil rights.
You know, what's interesting is how you're speaking now. I mean, what brings to mind is actually one of the main, if not the main, long-standing position of the Palestinian minority in Israel for a two-state solution. There are certain, you know, kind of, what do you call it, a fringe, I would say a minority view over the years, especially of one-state solution, which was basically the PLO solution.
It's not possible.
Right, no, but what you're saying now is actually from the history of all the political parties that the Palestinian minority in Israel had, and this really begins in the 70s and 80s. There was a consensus, more or less, that the main way for them to integrate into Israel, because they're not fully integrated, right? I mean, there's certain discrimination, housing, municipal development, and education. I mean, it's improving, right? But we're talking about also decades ago. Their position was that for them to fully integrate into Israel, there has to be a two-state solution. And that in itself also provides solution to the refugee crisis that you're speaking about, the refugees who actually need a territory to live on.
Look, I don't know what happens under the table with negotiations, but I don't believe anything that's happening on the news. I'm going to give you a straight example. If you go back 2007, 2010, 11, something like that, there was two major negotiations happening between PLO, Hamas, and the Israelis about some sort of truce or peace deal. It broke down. Wait, again, it was under the Mecca table. I don't know if you remember the Mecca negotiations, also around 2011. Apparently, it was about the truce. Same thing, normalization and stuff like that. So both parties went, even Hamas and the PLO agreed in Mecca that they will have no more internal issues and they will have unified front to negotiate, to step forward. Just when they left Mecca, they went back to their ways. Now, why I'm telling those stories, because the very same thing happened after the Arabs did it, specifically Emirates, when they did the Abrahamic Accord. The two parties, PLO and Hamas, went aggressively against it, started criticizing, attacking, and calling them traitors and everything. Okay, but you were doing the same thing. So what I'm saying is it wasn't the same deal. If it was the same deal, they would have at least reached somewhere. They are asking for something under the table. Number two, the problem with representation is those people have been planted years ago. We have no control over neither PLO nor Hamas. It doesn't mean now, of course, the simplest way to attack us is like, hey, but they are your representatives. You elected them. No, we didn't. The force elected them. The system elected itself. Case in point, even in the purest and most pretentious democratic countries like USA, like Britain, like everywhere, can you just pop out and say, I want to be elected, I want to be an activist? They will destroy you in a political way, in a nice way, but still you can't change the system. No single entity or ideology can actually change the system suddenly. So why is it people expect Palestinians to suddenly remove Hamas or PLO? We can't. If you can, we can. You couldn't, like, you'd hear a lot of arguments about Netanyahu, but still, how many times he was in office? Sharon.
Yeah, right.
I know that they skipped my mind now, but the majority of prime ministers weren't really popular, right? But still, it's not really you who elect them. There's a majority in play that places these situations.
I mean, right now, the Prime Minister of Israel, Bennett, you know, he comes from a small party that only had like 4 or 5 seats in the Knesset.
But still, it's a party. It has finances and it has limitation. Plus, it took them years to make something. Also, they were attacked or fought for in a better democratic way. If you right now try to change something in the Arab region, you'll be faced with let's go with the legal restriction. I'm not gonna talk about intimidation, which happens a lot. Let's say you are beyond intimidation and go into the legal system. The legal system is made by the very same people in the power to prevent someone else to come change it. And to change it without bloodshed, you have to go through elections. And that election rules are set by them. And you know, every year, every election year, they update small things that they think it might affect them. They just change the law. You don't follow up those little things because we have a bigger thing in play, but the system is corrupt. The system is set like, hey, you cannot even apply to be a candidate unless you go through some hoops. Those hoops are specifically made to be passed only by them.
So you state that, you know, you think your opinion is your belief, your fundamental understanding of this is that the solution is in a two-state solution, right? I mean, I personally have, you know, I have reservations, but
I do too, but I'm just saying, I suppose it would be the easier solution. I'm not saying it can be easy. And right now it's impossible. All I'm saying is to even think about that solution, to even consider negotiating, you have to pull out, like, if you're playing cards and your opponent have a joker, you have to push it aside, the ace. You have to push it aside. Then you can negotiate on something equal, humanitarian, something we can all agree or disagree against. That's another issue. And anyone who says problems will disappear is unrealistic. Remember, even in the best countries, even in the most, in the coolest countries, neighbors fight. That's a given. There's no two neighboring countries that don't have some sort of argument, whether culturally, socially, or something. We're not going to solve everything. All I'm saying is you have to pull this because this is a fuel for militias. And all I want to do is remove militias from the equation.
I mean, it's interesting. So you think that it would be possible to or for Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, if it's included in a two-state solution, for the Palestinians to settle for less than sovereignty? Because I mean, we're talking about small space, and we're talking about dealing with a superpower.
Let me say it in another way. Before I say yes to what you're saying, I would say I might ask for more. If I was the negotiator, I might ask for more. Like right now, the West Bank and the Gaza and the West Bank, they are not connected. I could ask for a connection. If you have the peace of mind, if we have the agreement, if everyone is living in peace, what's your argument to deny me that? Right now, it's your security. If you get your security assurances, what's left? Why would you make blocks in my way? So I will get more support. I will get more international support, given that you get your security, I get my security.
So, I mean, it's very practical what you're saying. I think that, I don't know.
I don't know either
how it's going to play out. But I was thinking that
well, I'm clear about that. I don't know anything. I don't believe. I just believe. Sorry for interrupting you, but I have to say this. I just believe in the quote. They say they didn't believe it was impossible, so they did it.
Right. Yeah.
So, here's your limitation.
Right. So, I mean, since you said that you think that the Palestinians would settle for something like less than sovereignty.
Everything. I think of it as in business. People don't know what they want until they get it. I mean, if you suppose, like I pitch you a fidget spinner as a product idea, would you buy it before it was launched? You wouldn't buy it. It's stupid.
Right.
But everyone did buy it.
I see what you're saying. Okay.
Also, I'm going to say this bluntly, as I'm saying about everything. There's a lot of questions, specifically in Quora, about whether Israel is an apartheid state or not. Typically, everyone against it will say it is, everyone with will say it's not, and everyone will jump to explanations. First, my opinion is, the term is actually derived from the African term, and you know the explanation to that probably. It's not specifically, it doesn't specifically apply to Israel. But let's say it does. I would say, yes, it is. In this case, it is an apartheid state. However, for people who just draw it as the only one, let's talk about Iran. Let's talk about Saudi Arabia. I mean, if you want to change the word, change it. Why settle for Israel?
Right. I mean,
go all in. If you want to change the word and remove anything religious as in governance, change it. I'm not gonna say personally, I'm not gonna say, hey, I'm pro religious governance. I'm not. But if it exists, again, I'm gonna go back to choice. If it exists that, let's say I'm right now a citizen of Israel and I don't like this, at least you have to give me the choice to leave, not to come, to leave. If you decided as a group that you want to live in this land under your own rules, that also falls under freedom, given that you don't interfere with my freedom to leave. Do you understand what I'm saying? The problem with the solutions is most of them present a solution like, hey, you have to accept this. What if I don't want to accept it? I am free to choose, right? The majority did. Fine, give me a choice to leave, not to stay, to leave. But if you take away that choice to leave and you force me to live under your rules, then you are another prison. Similar to what I described about refugee camps. Okay, you don't want to give us any civil rights, any things to do, and you don't give us a chance to leave. What do you expect us to do? At least give us a TV. Do you get my point here?
Yeah, no, I
easy,
get your point. I get your point. I think, in kind of, if I can contribute my view of this, I think that in terms of practically speaking, I think however it's going to resolve in the future, and hopefully it will resolve eventually, if not now, and eventually. I think that in some sense, the basis or the foundation for some kind of resolution should come from the Palestinian minority in Israel. And they're striving for more integration, etc. Because
do you know the sorry, the social, the peer, what they call it, peer pressure?
yes,
It's similar to what's happening. So a minority cannot just go argue everyone without a static solution. I cannot be one living in Israel under protection or law or money or finances or security or whatever right I have, and go argue with someone living in a camp or a refugee under his own supposed country. His own country call him a refugee, and then tell him, hey, you have to settle. Who am I? I'm living in peace. I cannot give you, like, I cannot preach you. For someone to preach you must give you must give before you ask. I'm saying of course, we're not asking a normal person in a normal situation. We're talking about people who are in captivity, something like that, and you're asking them to give back. No, give them an option before you decide. Give them an option to leave, then decide. If they didn't want to leave and they want to still fight and live that, then base your opinion. But you can't tell someone without any option that they are bad. They didn't choose. That's one. I wanted to mention, I don't know, idea slipped my mind. I remember what I wanted to say in a bit.
Rebecca, do you want to contribute something?
So I was muted. Yeah, but I wanted to say thank you. I think that this was a very interesting discussion. A lot of times it's true. I would say both sides, but I do notice it a little more from the Palestinians. They repeat talking points, at least over here, and they talk about what they are, what they want. And but I do get skeptical of these talking points, that if a reality were actually rolled out, then they're told to react in a certain way about what that reality is. And in a sense, they're told to react in many cases in opposite ways about what that reality is. So if a solution is rolled out, there's how they would actually take to it and how they're told to take to it. So like, I remember, for example, that this was before Shrinking the Conflict was put into place. I submitted something about the Israeli government policy of shrinking the conflict to a space, well, by the author of it, to a space about Palestine, talking about these are ways that you can make the Palestinians' lives better without having a treaty. But now that it's become the Israeli government policy, there obviously, to be fair, there might be a difference between the conception of it and the implementation of it that we're not getting to. Like Micah Goodman, the architect of Shrinking Conflict, his idea is that this would be,
a book, yeah.
It's a book, and his idea is that it would be a gradual set of steps towards ending the occupation. But is this the current Israeli government's policy? It is really not clear, but with Bennett, at the very least, it looks like it's not. With Lapid, we're not sure. We're not even sure he would come to power, or anybody else would come to power who would be in there turning Shrinking the Conflict into ending the occupation. But So it could sound like a nice idea, but now that it's the policy, a bunch of people are a lot more critical of it because it's getting that messaging, it's getting that scrutiny.
Okay. When you're ready, I can start answering.
Yeah, you can start answering.
Okay. I'm going to go start about your skepticism. It's in place. And definitely not me, not anyone can assure any sort of peace in the when we suggest things. All I'm saying is I build my ideas on a logical scale, not on our specific case. How? I'm going to take a very different example, but just to give you an idea. If you want to be a better person, but you're in a situation where someone is blackmailing you, and on the other hand, you're blackmailing someone else. But at this point, you decided to be a better person. So do you stop blackmailing the other person, or do you keep blackmailing him, pretending, saying, hey, but I'm being blackmailed, to excuse your other thing? When you do something good, you do it unconditionally in the hopes of karma will reward you. I'm not talking religion. I'm not talking politics. You just do what you have to do right, and then expect the good to come to you. In this case, when I presented that solving the Palestinian refugee issue in order to solve the militia issue, again, I said it many times, in separation of the actual problem. I said, logically, it could help a solution. But if I present it as a logical, mathematical formula, 1 + 1 = 2, it wouldn't match. But in a sense of a humanitarian solution, if we solve one thing, we know in our heart it's related. We know it could help. And if it didn't help, we still did the good thing. You see where I'm going? We still did a good thing. We still solved a problem.
Yeah.
Now, will karma reward us forward or not? You can't demand it. When you do something good, when you give someone a few bucks just to help out, you don't expect him to come work for you the next day.
What about Jerusalem?
My own opinion, I don't care. As long as it has open access. Everyone knows it has a religious divinity to everyone involved, to Muslims, to Christians, to Jewish, to everyone who believes in the holy books, in the Abrahamic religions. So it must have untethered full access to everyone. The governance wouldn't matter much if you give the rights. Now, calling it a capital, I know this is a very big argument, but then what? At least I'm talking about the praying.
Well, it's symbolic. Symbolic. I mean,
it's symbolic. I know.
Let's say you have a shared capital.
Shouldn't matter as long as you have a different set of rules. Like if I can access it anywhere with security, doesn't matter. Vatican has security, but still everyone can access. I went into Vatican. I spent a full day within, and I'm a Muslim. No one stopped me. This is what I'm saying. As long all what was done to me in the Vatican was being checked into a security gate, right? And I went in and spent the day. That's all I'm saying. It should be similar to that. That's one practical going on example. Why not make the Vatican with similar thing? Now, the Vatican chose Swiss to govern it, present a solution. If Israel can protect it, I personally don't care, as long as I have access to it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so being able to talk about what specific compromises you will be willing to make is definitely, I think, a very good step in the process.
No one will give you acceptance to such solutions, but when you do it, you eliminate the complaint. Like, hey, I'm gonna do this virtual argument with you now. Let's suppose I have untethered access to Jerusalem and I can go pray anytime I want. And then I come ask you, I say, hey, I want the governance of that. You say, what? Now we go to a judge, to a third party. I present my case. I want to take governance of it. I want to take the protection of it. I say, okay, give me an offer. What do I have to present? What international community will accept my offer if I do not present a better offer than yours? If I find flaws in your protection and I offer a better solution, it's a shame on you not to accept.
Yeah.
If I can protect it better. Listen, think of everything. I like this psychological theory, the razor, if you know it. Yeah. The simplest solution to anything is the first obvious solution. So think of everything logically. Now, you ask someone, hey, will they accept? No, of course. If you ask them 10 million years, no one will accept. You will always have arguments. But if you do the solution and someone comes and want to take over, he has to prove they can do better. Right now, even I, the non-political, I can do better. I can, if I take the governance of Jerusalem, I can easily do better. I can hire, given that I have money, of course, I can hire good security. I can do checkpoints, and I do checkpoints for security. I wouldn't care about nationality. So when I do some set of rules that match Jewish, Muslims, and Christians, tell me, who will complain? Will the Vatican come to me and say, we want to take over? I'll say, why? You can come. It's yours. You don't have to take over. It's yours. Just come in, live there. Who will stop you?
So, okay, so my question is like this, based on what you said. Let us say your view, let's say your views are the majority of the Palestinians, let's say. Not all Palestinians, but a majority. How would you, let's say, deal with the remainder that has, let's say, more extreme views than you?
Okay, I'm going to be sarcastic with you right now and tell you, even the Israelis will not accept. You have to put the solution, they will swallow it. You think we don't know how many sectors are within the Israelis? We know. Not every one of you will accept the same solution. What you're saying right now, you'll find your neighbor disagreeing with you. But if you make up a logical solution, the other Israeli will come to you and say, why did you give up this piece of land? And you tell him, why not? He must,
so we're stuck.
Your neighbor must come to you and prove to you that we're not deserving. We should prove. Sorry.
So we are stuck, basically, we're stuck by our extremists on both sides.
Yeah, which I said, to solve the problem, stop focusing on the same fake solution everyone was trying to do for 50, 60, 70 years, giving money. Oh, this is worth mentioning. The money, the financial aids that was happening to Palestinians, it was going to those, the very governments or entities you call terrorists. So, and that begs the question, if you consider PLO and Hamas terrorists, why are you funding them? This you should ask your allies. If I was an Israeli, I would ask the US, I would ask the Arabs, I would ask even the Israelis themselves at some points. They were helping PLO or others helping Hamas. This money was going to them, and then you go negotiate with them and ask them for solution. Wait, but and this is related to another theory, the continuance of struggle theory. Many theorize that even Israel is happy and with the extension of struggle because it's financially profitable. Now, there are casualties, that's collateral damage. I'm talking about many believe that Israel, Hamas, Hezbollah, Fatah, Iran, other entities like that are profitable, are massively profitable from this struggle. So they wanted to continue. Again, when I thought about it, when you asked me my own opinion, I said, what's the biggest card they are playing right now? The excuse of refugees, the right of return. okay, did you ask those people like me, do we want the right of return? I said it many times. Before I was able to travel, if you come to me and say, okay, I'm poor, I'm living in a camp, and you come to me and say, hey, okay, your land is free. Haifa is your land, go back to Haifa. Imagine it. No, seriously, imagine it. Put yourself in my shoes. You're living in a camp and you are giving the choice to go back to Haifa. But what's changed? Me as a poor person, no money, no education, no job. If I go to Haifa, what will happen to Haifa? It will become another camp.
Yeah.
Right? I didn't provide any extra value to Haifa, nor Haifa presented any extra value to me.
Yeah.
We have nothing to give. You cannot ask, you cannot give. You have nothing to trade for. But if a very same person came to me and said, without specifying a country, even in the same country, come have a job. Would I take that job with the money or security, or would I remain in the camp?
Yeah.
So why are people discussing the end game when they don't even know how to play the field?
Okay.
You can't win if you don't know how to play.
Okay, so we can wrap this up with a couple of concluding questions.
Go
So
ahead.
this is very interesting line. And yeah, so I'm going to go on a slightly different trajectory to kind of continue the flow of where we were going. Do you have any thoughts about what might be a specific tangible step to make a solution happen and to kind of disable the extremists and obstructionists and make it into something that would be reflective of what is the best for the majority on both sides?
Should you want to start, Ignat?
Okay, I mean, it's not a hefty question. I mean,
Yeah.
I have to think that one through. I mean, I don't see a solution, if you ask me. I think it's all wrapped up in a big problem that is almost impossible to solve. One of the ways that I know it's one of the ways that I think that what I can do personally is to try to argue for some kind of coexistence, right? And I think that practically speaking, some of the I would say primary ways to begin taking steps to that kind of coexistence is to make the state of Israel more accommodating towards the Arab minority. And it's going that way. I mean, for example, Rebecca mentioned shrinking the conflict. I mean, Mika Goodman, who wrote the book that influenced that idea and disseminated it, he has a very good point about this. But I think that it could also be kind of turned inwardly, in the sense that it should really start with the Palestinian minority in Israel, and then work itself outward. I mean, I think that's more practical, kind of institutional and legal basis to move ahead in some kind of direction that would resolve this issue. Now, the issue itself is quite large, and I think it's, like I said, at this point, is impossible to solve.
Yeah. So Mohamad, we can wrap it up. And what do you think?
Well, I think unlike him, I do believe there's this simple solution or start of solution. One, something is already happening. No one is talking about it. No one thinks it will have effect, but it will. And it's starting to have, how do I say it, internal house problems. What Trump did. I like Trump. I like he's aggressive. I like he's direct. I like he's actually insulted the Israelis and insulted the Palestinians right to their face, because a little like him, I think they are both stupid at many times. And seriously, they are negotiating stuff and then going back, and their other colleagues will disagree. Then they go back to their deal and remove it. And, you know, we're stuck in that loop. I like that he stopped the UN funding. Now, if I was profiting or benefiting from that, I wouldn't be happy. But I'm telling you, we weren't actually benefiting from that. So us as Palestinians, we didn't lose a thing. The militias controlling us lost. That makes me happy. If UN efforts were coming directly to us, of course, I will be furious at Trump. Whether he meant it or it was a stupid decision that became a good decision, I don't know. All I know is it was a good decision to me, in my opinion. Second thing about the actual solution, briefly, as I said before, I still believe it can happen and this requires either a few influencers, huge influencers, or the end game is having more finances, because solving the immigrants, the refugee issues just requires money, which is already being spent. So we either have to deliver that message to try a solution. I mean, you're spending billions every year. Let's spend 1 billion to solve this huge part of the equation and put it aside, which could present a more possible solution and less militia power in the negotiation. Then we could possibly ask for more of our rights, because we also, many might think, hey, this is a solution that benefits Israel. No, it benefits me too, because I can get all the people in my side if I argue with you in a humanitarian level, and I pull out your excuse for our militia and terrorists. Because right now, many Israelis will hide behind, hey, but you have terrorists. Okay, I can't remove them, but I have a solution to remove them. Help me remove the terrorists. Then let's see, what's your argument? I just want to live. I want to live in peace. Of course, I want my full rights, just like you want your full rights. So this is a solution. We need either money or finances, or possibly a government just like the states. If they are so curious about, you know, helping us, why not host? Of course, this is a big decision, but they already do. They get millions every year. So why not start accepting or facilitating the Palestinian immigration process with less restriction? Like, you can't ask, hey, the Palestinians, show me a record of your finances and the proof you can build a life. No, you still need some finance. So this is why I went back to money, because someone has to pay that money for relocation. Well, or it could be some Israeli influencers. There are filthy rich Israelis, Americans, influencers. One person who is convinced with this idea can change it, can make it happen. It doesn't even have to be about naturalizing itself. If he didn't get government approval, he can just even he can make the money, make him more money. How? By building companies in the West and giving them work visas. He doesn't have to worry about just work visas. So he can do projects, make money, and solve the problem. Or he can just donate it to a country and tell the country to accept some residencies, and it all can be conditional. I mean, it doesn't have to be a passport right on. It could be like, hey, you get a 5-year residency. If you break the law, blah, 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 you get sent back or prevented from having a nationality all your life. No human is born bad. You put him in the situation, and at least all psychologists agree that the experience will reflect with you. So how come you deny science from specific people? Now, when it comes to us, no science is applicable. Why? Apply the same sciences. Remove the situation, remove the factors, then judge. What do you think? Israelis have been around the world for thousands of years, right?
Yes.
What happened? Wasn't the Holocaust kind of a trigger to prevent that from happening again?
You
I'm not
mean
saying it's a
the,
good thing. I'm saying it's a cause and effect.
right,
Now, Palestinians have a cause.
right.
There's an
right.
effect. So we
Right.
have to solve it. Imagine if Israelis, and this is of course theoretical, but imagine they didn't give them a land, they didn't unify, and do you think they wouldn't form militias and form terrorist acts in revenge? They will feel prosecuted, they will revenge. It's human nature. Probably.
Yeah.
Yes. So thank you. Thanks to both of you for coming on, and thanks to everyone who is watching the video. So you could see some of the other videos that we have recorded where we discuss other topics. And you can also stay tuned for more videos that we will continue to come out with.